when looking at those common kind of pain points and issues, there are a lot of improvements that AI can bring to the table in terms, particularly, and now I'm diving into the details, in terms of automating a lot of the mundane routine tasks that management teams are responsible for on a day-to-day.
We have Arthur with Domos joining us to share his insights on AI and how to use it in the property management industry.
With my co-founder, Dima Rudolph, we started Domos a couple of years ago to really do one thing, is applying AI to residential property management. We help with AI, making property managers better at their job by focusing really on high value tasks. And the way we do that is that we automate the very mundane, inconsistent, time-consuming tasks, and frankly boring, so that they can focus actually on those high-value tasks and improving, really building the community and improving the relationship with their residents and having running more efficient operations, if you talk about the leadership, for instance.
Welcome to Beyond Rent. You don't have to go very far before you hear someone talking about AI. It is poised to change much of what we're doing right now and well into the future. However, there's still a lot of questions on what we can do with it today. So we have Arthur with Domos joining us to share his insights on AI and how to use it in the property management industry. Arthur, welcome to Beyond Rent.
Thanks for having me, Joe. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I really appreciate you taking some time out. We were just talking about how we both travel for work and there's always a lot that's going on when we return from travel. So I appreciate you taking the time to really have this important conversation with us. We know AI is important. The whole world's talking about it, but we want to know what you and what others should really be focused on when it comes to this topic. But before we get into that, let's get to know you a little bit better. So go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience.
Sure. So my name is Arthur Attal. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Domos. Originally from France, but I've been in the US for 20 years. I started my career in finance and then transitioned to technology. So I've been in technology for the last 10 years, focusing in different areas, but starting with earlier version of AI. Some of the listeners may have heard of the term machine learning, and maybe we'll talk about this earlier. And so with my co-founder, Dima Rudolph, we started Domos a couple of years ago to really do one thing, is applying AI to residential property management. So I'm excited about everything that we've been doing and with Rent Manager in particular, and with our shared customers, and to share a bit more about how we apply AI to residential property management.
Yeah, that's great. And when you talk about starting this company a few years ago to focus on AI in the residential property management industry, had to be one of the first, right? There's only a few people that really, when you go back that far, that were thinking about AI. Yes, the terminology was out there. We were talking about machine learning, but there weren't a whole lot of companies focused on it. So you have a lot of experience in this area. So I'm really excited to learn more from you. So as we really jump into the topic that we have for today, and really how AI is really going to change how we do things. When you think about our industry, property management, how does AI really fit in the real world to our industry?
Sure. So, looking at residential property management, every company is different, right? Different type of properties that they manage, different locations, but there are a lot of commonalities also among them, especially if you look at, call it mid-market, 500 to several thousand of units under portfolio, a lot of commonalities, a lot of similar pain points, right? Whether it's fairly thin margins, right? Especially in the recent inflationary environment, whether it's a high turnover of employee, that's a reality. So when looking at those common kind of pain points and issues, there are a lot of improvements that AI can bring to the table in terms, particularly, and now I'm diving into the details, in terms of automating a lot of the mundane routine tasks that management teams are responsible for on a day-to-day, and that are unable to cover hundreds of emails or and text messages and phone calls just because of the sheer volume of communications today and all the channels. And I'm not even talking about like people reaching out to Facebook and Google and other third-party platforms. So property managers still have a finite number of hours in their days, right? They have lives outside of their work. And tenants' expectations have also increased, right? They expect people, and that's sign of our times, right? To be available 24/7. And so we're going to talk about that in more detail, I'm sure. But we help with AI making property managers better at their job by focusing really on high value tasks. And the way we do that is that we automate the very mundane, inconsistent, time consuming tasks and frankly boring, so that they can focus actually on those high value tasks and improving, really building the community and improving the relationship with their residents and having a more efficient, running more efficient operations. If you talk about the leadership, for instance.
Yeah, that's a great synopsis of really where we're at with this. And it's funny, you kind of talk about how property managers have lives outside of their work, and we kind of laugh about that, but because of the structure of the business and the demand of that job, many property managers would tell you that a lot of their personal time is taken up trying to follow up or be available, or there's an emergency. All of these things that are happening that spill over into their personal time. So work-life balance has been a struggle in our industry for many years and a lot of burnout because there is so much happening. You talked about all the different methods that residents and tenants can use to communicate with a property management company. There's always been somebody on the other end trying to communicate back with them, and that expectation is increasing, right? It used to be, oh, it's Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, maybe Saturdays. Now people want answers in the evening or overnight, because that's really how our world operates. Is it's very, very much in real time. So maybe let's dive in a little bit deeper on that, and maybe some examples that you see as, I would say, ones that people should focus the most on, like most readily available. Like this is a real issue that exists in the property management space that AI can step in almost immediately and help resolve.
Absolutely. So I can give a couple of examples. One that people may be more familiar with because it's been around for a little longer, through kind of earlier versions of what's called chatbots, is around the leasing piece, right? So helping leasing teams capture all prospects 24/7, right? So if the leasing agent is showing a tours, there should be a way to capture prospect calling. If the leasing agent is on the weekend spending time with his or her family, there should be basically a method for prospect to get the information and be able to schedule a tour. So now with AI, you can have via phone, via text messages, via web chat on your website, via email also. We'll talk a lot about email because this is still today one of the main mean of communication for property management, a way for prospect to get not only a fast answer, because fast is easy now, that's table stake, but really a good answer, a personalized answer that provides information on the specific unit, but also takes into account previous interaction that the prospect may have had or recent changes in the inventory. So the capabilities of AI have increased, and so should the expectation be for property managers in terms of what AI can deliver. So one example on the leasing front, but now, and that's a little bit more sensitive, right? Because we're not talking about prospect, we're going to talk about tenants, right? So communications with your tenants, right? Being able actually to be available 24/7 by responding to your tenants, having an AI that pulls information from rent manager and is able to respond to a lot of inquiries. And when it's too sensitive, escalating it to a human who can get back to them on Monday morning or to the emergency line if this is an emergency. So kind of having this triage for communication. Then you have the follow-up on delinquent tenants, right, who are behind on rent, doing this in a very consistent manner. Property managers know that it takes them a lot of time to stay on track with this, and it's also a frustrating process. So automating that, but also making it very, again, personalized, right? Knowing that two delinquent tenants do not have the same exact, history. So kind of reflecting that in the level of communication. And the last example I will share is reviewing document. That's another part. It's not related to communication, but that takes property managers a lot of time, right? Like reviewing certificate of insurance, issuing standard forms if you're managing an HOA, sending a valuation notice. That takes time, but that can really be automated because you're talking about standard form and you can have AI solution basically review those forms and be able to share feedback within minutes and doing it. And I think that's very important consistently. Nothing falls through the cracks.
Yeah, and that really is where AI really shines, I think, in the fact that it can do things so consistently. It understands things that, let's be honest, humans sometimes forget or we miss a step. Really, AI computers really miss a step, right? Because it's just not in their nature to do that. One of the things I really like that you said there, when you went back and talked about chatbots, and chatbots have been around for a long time. But I think we all have had one, if not many, experiences using a chat bot in the past, and you're doing your best to get the answer you're looking for from this chat bot, and it just isn't able to provide it. It keeps giving you the same answer over and over again. You can tell it just has predefined answers, and you get to the point where you really just want to talk to a human because it can't give you the answer, and it doesn't understand the context that is needed. This is really, I think, where AI shows its value, is what you just said. It can understand context and history and provide a good answer, not just the same answer over and over again. Because a lot of people would say, oh, chatbots are great because if you ask about pet policy, it'll give the same answer every single time. There's no nuance. However, AI can take it further because now it understands, who am I talking to? What is the history? And what are they really trying to ask me? Is that what you're seeing? Are you seeing more people adopt chatbots now simply because AI is so much more robust than what the prior technology offered?
Yeah, so chatbots have become more useful, but they can be somewhat limited. And I'll get to that. But before, because you said something very important, Joe, is maybe worth sharing a quick word technologically as to how the recent version of AI supported by LLMs, large language models, have completely transformed the usability and effectiveness of chatbot. What happened before, it's kind of like if you went on an airline website, you can still do today, and you get frustrated and you start typing customer rep, customer rep. The reason is exactly as you said it. The answers are predefined. It's called scripted. So basically, the company will, like an FAQ, right? They will anticipate question and write specific response to those questions. So if you write the same question over and over again, you're going to get the same response over and over again. The problem, the limitation here, obviously, is that if you deviate from that, which will frequently happen, the chatbot will not be able to respond. And that's really what creates the frustration. Now, if you're talking about the recent AI technology, it's a complete different architecture. Instead, I think the best terms is to say it's things, right? So you give the machine basically knowledge and instructions. The same way you would give a human, for instance, a new employee, you say, hey, this is where knowledge resides, right? In Rent Manager and those Excel spreadsheets, etc. And these are your instructions for performing your job. That's how we approach AI. And that's how the new AI technology enables to do that. So it's very important to kind of understand this massive shift that has happened in the last couple of years and what it has enabled. So going back to your question about chatbot, yes, so you can have chatbot that are a bit more efficient and can think outside the box. But what's really interesting is not only the communication that, yes, is better, is everything else that goes around that. What I mean by that is that what you're trying to do is not only communicate, but actually act upon a communication, perform certain tasks. That's where the real value comes into the automation. I'll give you a very simple example. If a tenant reaches out and say, "Hey, I have, my AC is not working." So yes, you can respond. You can respond better. But the question is, what else are you going to do after that? What would a human do? A human would open a work order on Rent Manager. That's what we have our AI do. We mimic the tasks that humans do, and it goes well beyond communication. That's where really a lot of the sophistication comes in. It's not only about improving the communication, it's about mimicking the tasks that humans do.
Yeah, that's a great point there, and even for myself, when I think about AI and I talk to people about I tend to find that they focus very heavily on writing assistants, and you even talked about maybe data analysis, and I want to talk about that because I think those are important. But very rarely are people talking about what you just said. This idea of mimicking what a human would do, taking that action and just completing it because it is not a difficult task. It is not something that takes high level thinking, right? It is a very mundane task, like you had mentioned. So that was a great example in the maintenance space where AI can just create that work order and go ahead and push it into whatever workflow or automation that that property management company already has in place.
Absolutely. It's about understanding the standard operating practice of each firm, because each management firm has their different one, and adapting to them. That's the key about AI, and that's our approach also, is to say, we're adapting to you. AI should adapt to you the same way a new employee adapts to you. You don't do the other way around. It should be the same way, right? And today, unfortunately, in technology, especially software platform, they come in and say, hey, this is our platform. Here is what you need to do to adopt it. And here's you need to train and then learn. And then your new employees will need to get another training with a version update. We strongly believe that it's this new era, as we're trying again to mimic what humans do, that the AI should really be personalized and adapt to the environment, to the operation, even the way the AI communicates, the tone, right? Like you would have an AI that communicates differently, that should communicate differently if you're a property manager in the Midwest rather than if you're a property manager in New York, because people communicate differently there. So why wouldn't the technology, if it's trying to mimic humans, in addition to mimicking the task, also mimic the way it communicates? So it should really go a step further. And to your point, I think that I'm trying to illustrate is that people, and I think it's for lack of education, right? Like are exposed to AI and kind of like how ChatGPT, that's helpful for this, but how does that apply to my business? I'm a property manager. I don't really see that. It's really about kind of understanding the capability and the potential of AI applied specifically for your industry.
Yeah, and it's really exciting to think about those capabilities because that is where efficiency and scale, I think, really can happen, right? When technology is stepping in. I mean, and we've been using automation for a long time, so that's not new. But the automation was always kind of what you talked about with the chatbot. It was very scripted. It was very predictable. If this, then that. There's no thinking with automation. It's just these things are happening when these other things happen. Where AI is stepping in and it's thinking about it in this and making decisions based on what your standard operating procedures are. Now, how do you teach AI how your business operates? I imagine that's probably what you do best. That's why your company exists. How do you teach AI my business practices?
So a couple of ways. So first, there's a lot of data that we've pulled and that we keep pulling by being integrated on tens of thousands of units and being on hundreds of emails and communication on a daily basis. So there's a base that has helped us basically provide enough information to and data to the AI to understand what represent the role of a property manager, an assistant property manager, because that's basically what we're building really. And so there is kind of like this general knowledge that we've provided with the AI, and that each additional communication helps gets added to that knowledge. So really that this AI, I've seen a lot of corner cases, right? Um, so there's about an, and then it's about an instruction, and that's where it gets personalized to each business, right? So when should the AI escalate a specific issue because it's deemed sensitive? That's where the human should step in, right? Because the AI should not operate in a silo. It operates hand in hand with the human, just like an employee operates hand in hand with the rest of his or her team. You said a very important word. You said decision. How the AI makes decision. That's a critical piece, right? Like the AI can think and can respond and perform certain tasks, but when it comes, and maybe that's a segue to like AI limitation today, when it comes to really judgment, right, about renegotiating the rent for renewal or implementing potentially a payment plan to help out a tenant who's behind on rent, that's probably where the AI's involvement should stop. And when it should escalate to the property manager, who then comes in because there's a decision to be made. There's a judgment call to be made. And this is a sensitive enough decision that this is where humans add the most value. And this is where humans should be focusing on. So it's kind of like teaching the AI to be really perfect. And when I mean perfect, it's really perfect. You cannot be like 95% there, right? It has to be close to 100% as possible, perfect at automating those mundane tasks, right? At never having anything fall through the crack and being very consistent about it, but also knowing where to stop, where to the buck stop. And that's where a lot of the sophistication goes in, because this is very different in property management as it would be in, I don't know, healthcare or any other industry. So it needs a lot of knowledge. It needs very sophisticated instruction, general instruction, and then personalized one to know when you basically escalate a specific issue to a human.
Yeah, and I appreciate you breaking that limitation down because the human does still need to be involved. And maybe with the lease renewal process, when you think about how that works, probably 90% of the time, it's just processing the paperwork, getting the new lease signed, all things that probably AI can do very well. But when somebody starts asking more nuanced questions or trying to negotiate the monthly rent, those are things that probably deem high enough value for a human to get involved. But if you can deal with 90% of them through technology, now your team can really just focus in on that 10% that really needs the extra help. It needs the extra touch. So I think that's really exciting for anyone that's listening to this, as far as like the employee experience, your staff experience, and how they get to engage with the resident versus engage with technology.
Absolutely. I think a lot of our discussion so far, what's implied is that this can help with, efficiency and quality of service with the tenant. But you mentioned something important is the also the job quality of property managers in general, right? That are going to be focusing on much more interesting and impactful tasks. And why property managers, I think, do what they do today, because they're also passionate about helping people, right? It's a service business. And if we help them by removing that burden of kind of bureaucracy and all those documents so that they can really focus on the people interaction, building communities, and so that when that person is renewing, to use your example, they know the name of their property manager because they've had interaction that weren't just kind of like follows up or complaints. That changes the entire kind of perspective that a resident may have on property management.
Yeah, and I brought up kind of the employee staff side. You brought up the resident experience side. It sounds like, yeah, there's a lot to gain on both sides, which is really exciting when you can impact both sides equally. I always think historically, when a company made improvements, it was normally to improve only one person's experience, whether it was the resident's experience or the staff experience. I think technology is a point where we can improve everyone's experience through it. So maybe we can talk a little bit about kind of that tenant retention through the use of AI and things like that. And earlier on in the conversation, you mentioned that email still is the most common way that people communicate with their property management company. Obviously, you know that because you see the data. But people are communicating through text and other ways. Do you know why is it still email that's the most popular? And is AI in a place where it maybe can move people to, I guess, channels that are more fast-paced in reply? Like I think text and chat are more like real-time communication, where email is like send and wait type communication.
Yeah, but I think it's for that very reason that email is a great and preferred way of communication, at least for property managers. Is that then first you have an expectation around reply time, right? If I'm the tenant sending a text, I'm expecting a response right away. And maybe to go back to that example I was giving earlier about a maintenance request, right? Like my AC is not working, right? I'm sending a text. I need you to send someone ASAP. Then you're kind of like you're bound by the length of that type of that medium, right? So you need to have this kind of like quick back and forth, and even in terms of de-escalating a situation, it's harder to do it through text messages. Now, if you talk about email, you can ask for more information because 90% of the time, the tenants don't provide enough information, right? So, oh, when did you first notice it? Did you try this? Did you try that? It's also a bit more of a formal way of communication, which AI can help with, right? Because it can, in minutes, send out an email that's very polite, that can de-escalate, that provides additional information, request information. When would you be available? Can we have permission to enter? So overall, and kind of in terms of like keeping tabs and tracking, communication going back to exchanges, overall email is great for that. I would say though that now, even with phone, when you have AI interacting with the phone with prospect or tenants, there's transcriptions that happen in the back end, and you can also have summaries, put on as note in the management system. So even phone now that you can have some of the advantages that email have in terms of kind of having a paper trail of what has been promised, what has been discussed, etc. But I don't know. I think that overall, especially when we talk for leasing, I think phone and SMS are maybe better suited. But for kind of what we call tenant experience, resident experience, email is still today the best form of communication.
Yeah, that's great insight because we talk about advances in technology, and I think we make these assumptions that we're all going to move to using text or other mobile friendly, quote unquote, forms of communication. But those are great reasons why email still is likely the best. It is that pacing. It is providing an opportunity for the PMC to calculate their response. And if AI is doing a lot of the emailing, when it does get escalated to a human, if it's via email, there isn't that expectation of a really quick turnaround. So now the human has an opportunity to evaluate the situation, try to understand what's happening before they're forced into a quick response. So I think that's great. Now, I want to move over and talk a little bit like making decisions based on data. When we think about data, we've said data is king for decades now. We all know it. We all believe it. But it's always been really hard to get data. It's been hard to analyze it in many ways. But it's even harder to make decisions on it because humans are emotional. So regardless of what the data says, sometimes we just make the decision that we want to make because we feel a certain way about it. How's AI starting to change our culture around decision making in the business?
Yeah, I think the key term I would use here that you implied is biased, right? Humans are biased by nature. And that's another advantage of AI is that it's unbiased. So when AI receives data, it will always analyze it in an unbiased way. Um, if we talk about, to use that same example about data around maintenance, around work orders, right? If a human looks at it, they will always have kind of like their own perspective, their own experience, kind of influencing a bit of how they pick and choose the data and how what they decide to choose. But if you ask AI to look at it in a very consistent and biased way, it's a different perspective that's kind of hard to argue against, right? That's kind of objective, if you will. And how AI can be useful in terms of looking at data for maintenance is that, as you mentioned, there's a lot of data available now, right? It's about how you take that data and use it in the most efficient way, right? So around maintenance, it's looking at all your maintenance tickets and basically breaking them down by property, but also by property manager, looking at the trend, over the last 30 days, seeing the evolution for specific property and the number of increase in maintenance ticket. You can also, from an AI perspective, there's a lot that's around sentiment analysis. So that's an interesting piece of data that we can talk about, right? So AI being involved in communication, some AI can do sentiment analysis. Is the tenant angry? Is the tenant grateful? Is the tenant very angry? So analyzing the content of a communication, whether phone, text, or email, and basically drawing conclusions. So going back to now when you're analyzing your data, you can say, hey, in my property 345, we see that tenants have been more and more grateful in the last 30 days, whereas in my property 678, they've been actually more angry. What has happened there? Has there been a change in personnel? Like, have we been changing something there? So one, there's a lot more data that you can use in terms of like sentiment analysis that before you were not able to just collect, number one. And then number two, when you analyze it, you're able to do it in a much more unbiased, objective way.
Yeah, and I love the unbiased side of it in that you talked about that sentiment that it can pick up on. The AI can understand if somebody's happy, sad, angry. Because sometimes when we get feedback from whether it's a tenant, a employee, a coworker, family member, and there's a negative emotion tied to it, the human nature sometimes is to justify it. Well, the resident was upset, but it was actually their fault. So I'm going to kind of exclude how they felt about it because they didn't do what they were supposed to do. We have that ability because we are applying our own emotion to their emotion, where AI doesn't. It just hears their emotion and records it as it takes it because it's unbiased. It doesn't have any additional emotion that it's bringing to the situation. So not only can it help you just review data in general better, but it can actually help you understand human emotion better and the fact that it doesn't have a stake in how the tenant feels. It's not bringing its own thoughts into it. I think that's really exciting. So when you look at kind of your solution and how it's analyzing that data, are people starting to maybe change how they operate or change how they interact with residents based on understanding the sentiment that their residents have towards their business?
Yeah, they do. And you mentioned a great point about how, people's behavior affect your own behavior, right? If a tenant reaches out to you very angry and cursing at you, you're not that likely to respond and saying, "Oh, I really fell for you. I'm so sorry. I understand," etc. Right? Like that's more likely to be an escalation, and that's what AI is great at, right? It will show empathy. It will say, "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that," but it will never commit to anything, right? It's not because you're saying, "Hey, I'm very angry, so you should give me a credit for next month." Like, no, and that's like where the AI has to stop and does stop, and it's a lot of sophistication goes around like knowing, kind of showing this empathy without committing to something in return, right? So that's an important part. But going back to your question, yes, behavior will change because once you have access to data, unbiased data, again, as we talked about specific tenants that are complaining about specific issue, where you can have the full visibility on to how it was addressed, knowing that it was addressed in a way where the AI was unbiased, de-escalating, and it helps you, especially in kind of like the leadership team, have also a better view and sense of your property management team and how each of them are treating specific issues, responding to specific issues. And you can look at it from an aggregate level, but you can also dive really deep into on even a per tenant basis of seeing like some of those, this tenant is more difficult to that other tenant because of all that information, including sentiment analysis information. So once you start saying like, okay, we implement a solution that's going to respond in an unbiased way and help us collect that sentiment analysis, you kind of remove what you just described, Joe, this kind of like human kind of bias and this question mark around, oh yeah, maybe it's my team who may not be actually responding the correct way, which may be true or not true, right? So now you kind of remove that and it gives you kind of like a better information to kind of act upon. So you're just more informed and can just run a better operation.
Yeah, that's really exciting. And because we are humans, we do have emotion, we do have feelings. I love that point you brought up about if somebody comes at you and they're angry, the way that you react to them will be a response to their level of emotion, where AI, it doesn't do that. It doesn't have that same reaction. So that's super exciting. Well, Arthur, I want to talk about the future a little bit before we come to the end of our episode here. There's a lot that can be done today. There's a lot that you are doing right now in your company, Domos. But what does the future hold for AI? A lot of people are trying to predict, is it going to replace our jobs? Is it going to do this or that? What do you think the next 3, 5+ years look like for AI within our industry?
Yeah, so I think this is probably the question that we all get the most. So first, let me say 3 to 5 years is a very long time when you look at AI and evolution, especially if you look where we were like 3 to 5 years ago. So I would say on this, like your guess may be as good as mine. I think AI will continue to improve. The underlying technology will continue to improve to provide even more sophisticated thinking so that it can automate even more tasks, so that it can understand further human emotion and capture data in an ever better way. Um, and that means concretely it's going to be able to automate more tasks. Now, I do not believe, I may be wrong again, you can quote me on that, but that AI will entirely replace property managers. I do not believe that. I do not believe that AI will replace leasing agents entirely, for instance. So I think instead it's going to really empower, and maybe, yes, I do believe that there will be smaller teams that are going to be much more effective at what they do. I think it's going to empower management organization to scale better, provide a higher quality of service with a leaner team that's more efficient and also happier. So you're going to have property managers that are more focused on high value tasks that are going to be happier at their job. You're going to have happier residents. So I think AI, I'm very obviously very biased on this, but I think AI will really usher a new era of property management where it's really going to back to what property management is. It's really a service industry, and it's going to be the humans are really going to be focusing on providing great service. And then you have a lot of other areas in AI that are going to help, like smart homes and helping you in many other ways. But as we focus really on property management, what this discussion is about, I think it will just further improve the number of tasks that can be done and done, frankly, better by an AI than a human. And it will kind of like draw this divide between those kind of low-level tasks that should go to an AI. It's like not even thinking about it. And then those high-impact tasks will go to our property managers. So jobs, some will get replaced, to be frank, but I think it's for the responsibility of a property manager, it's just going to evolve overall. And they're going to work with an AI the way they work with kind of an assistant property manager, an employee. So they're going to start building more skills, more tasks that an AI cannot do. And that's the whole management industry is going to benefit from that.
Yeah. And that's an exciting future, in my opinion, because people want to do high value work. People want to work on teams with others that are also doing high value work, right? Since you said effective, I think there's a lot of efficiency there. I'm excited for that future. Yes, teams will be smaller, but I think through that evolution, I think our industry can grow faster and become more professional, provide better service, right? Because so many people, their days are responding to emails and doing data entry and doing all of these things that are mundane, that are using technology, but they're not using their actual human skills the way that property managers probably should be doing to make sure that their residents and tenants are really, really happy. So super excited about that future. So Arthur, as we come to the end of this episode, I want you to share what you're up to over at Domos. What are you doing over there? What are kind of the key, I guess, features and products and services that you're offering? And how does our audience learn more about what you're up to?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned, we're a company that focuses entirely on AI for property management. And our goal is to cover the entire life cycle, from that initial prospect reaching out about availability all the way to your tenant moving out. So being involved in most of the interactions there and automating all the tasks, whether it's following up on delinquency, analyzing documents, and obviously communication, extracting the data, etc. Everything we've talked about. And so we're really excited. We're growing quite fast and have many customers, also rent manager users. And this has been a great partnership for us, being able to integrate with rent managers so that the AI can pull all the information in real time. And as I mentioned, so that the AI is seen really as a replacement for a human that adapts to each organization based on their processes, based on their preferences. So it's been a really exciting journey for us. And if people are interested to reach out, I'd be happy to talk to them. My email is arthur@joindomos, joindomos.com, and our website is joindomos.com.
That's excellent. And we'll have some links in the show notes as well. Highly encourage people to reach out. There's so much going on in AI right now. You really should be talking to the experts when it comes to AI. And the experts are really the people like Arthur that were founding companies years ago when most of us didn't know what AI was, right? So talk to these people. They've been working in this space for a long time. They really understand the application of it. So, well, thank you, Arthur, for joining us. And thank you to our listeners for joining us for another episode. And until next time, keep going beyond rent.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Beyond Rent. If you enjoyed this podcast, spread the word on social media and with your peers in the industry. To be notified when more episodes are released, subscribe using your favorite podcast player. Beyond Rent is brought to you by Rent Manager Property Management Software. Learn more about Rent Manager's industry-leading software solutions at rentmanager.com. Until next time, keep going beyond rent.